The kennel door clanged shut, and the German Shepherd changed before anyone else seemed to notice. 1 second he was standing deep in the run, ears angled back, weight carried toward his hind legs. The next, his mouth closed, his body went rigid, and his eyes fixed past the shelter worker's hip toward the narrow transition aisle. "Hold up," Jack Mercer said. He did not raise his voice. The worker froze with one hand on the latch and the other wrapped around a slip lead. Outside, a dry early fall wind scraped sagebrush against the chain-link fence behind the shelter, but inside the concrete corridor the air smelled of disinfectant, steel, and anxious dogs. The German Shepherd did not bark. He did not lunge. Not yet. Jack stood 6 feet away with a box of donated leashes tucked under one arm, his shoulders turned slightly instead of squared toward the kennel. At 36, he had spent enough years in the Navy SEALs to know what tension looked like before it became movement. But this was not his field, and he knew that too. So he watched. The worker looked at him. "You staff?" "No, trainer." "No." Jack set the box down slowly. "Just don't open that gate yet." A woman in a shelter polo came around the corner, irritation already forming in her expression. Her name tag read Dana Ruiz. "Problem?" Before Jack could answer, a middle-aged man near the front desk said, "The problem is that dog." His face was flushed. A folded adoption packet shook in one hand. "He turned on me in the parking lot. No warning. I'm done." Dana looked toward the kennel. "This is the 16th return." Jack glanced at her. 16. Bishop, according to the card clipped beside the run. Male German Shepherd. Approximately 4 years old. The word dangerous had been written in block letters across a temporary behavior note, then crossed out and replaced with review required. Bishop shifted one paw. His breathing had shortened. The worker near the latch adjusted the lead, and Bishop's shoulders rose another fraction. Jack noticed the sequence again. Movement at the threshold, pressure near the line, Bishop's attention snapping towards something beyond the worker. "Step back half a pace," Jack said. Dana's eyes hardened. "You don't direct my staff." "You're right." Jack lifted both hands away from his sides. "But he's getting tighter." Dana studied Bishop, then the worker. "Back up." The worker did. Bishop stayed rigid for 2 long seconds, then exhaled through his nose. His head lowered an inch. Nothing dramatic happened. That was what made Jack uneasy. Dana looked from the dog to him. "You saw that before he escalated?" Jack nodded once. "I saw something change." "Something what?" "I don't know yet." The adopter gave a bitter laugh. "Everybody thinks they're the one who understands him." He dropped the packet on the counter and walked out. Dana waited until the front door closed, then faced Jack again. 16 homes. 16 people decided he was too dangerous to keep. If you think you saw what all of them missed, tell me why none of them saw it. Jack picked up the box of leashes, ready to leave, but the kennel latch clicked behind him. Bishop did not look at Jack. He looked straight past the door, toward the same place he had been watching before. Bishop kept his eyes on the transition aisle while Jack lifted the box of leashes and stepped toward the exit. Dana moved with him, not blocking his path, just matching his pace until they were clear of the kennel row. "If you're leaving, leave," she said. "If you're staying, you follow our rules." Jack set the box on a folding table near intake. His truck was visible through the front windows, dust on the lower panels from a job site east of town. He had a marine safety inspection scheduled in 2 hours, 3 emails unanswered, and a habit of leaving places before anyone could make him responsible for more than he had agreed to carry. "I'm not here to take over," he said. Dana folded her arms. "That's usually what people say right before they start explaining my job to me." A woman in blue scrubs approached from the exam hall, pulling off latex gloves. Dana introduced her as Dr. Lena Cho, the shelter veterinarian. Jack nodded. No rank, no resume, no story about where he had served. "He's had a recent physical?" he asked. Dr. Cho studied him for a second. "Enough to know I'm not handing you a behavioral diagnosis from the hallway." "Good." That earned the smallest shift in her expression. "He's not limping. No obvious wound. No fever. Nothing today that explains that kind of change by itself. That does not mean nothing hurts, and it definitely doesn't mean you get to call it trauma because you saw him stiffen once." Jack glanced back toward the kennel corridor. "I wasn't going to," Dana said. "Then what were you going to call it?" "A sequence." She waited. Jack pulled a business card from his wallet, checked the time on his phone, then slid the card back without offering it. Outside the shelter, He would spend the afternoon checking emergency ladders, fuel shutoffs, and deck hazards on a small commercial operation near the Deschutes River. He liked work with written tolerances. A railing passed or failed. A valve opened or it did not. People were harder. Dogs, apparently, were worse. I saw his mouth close, he said. Breathing changed. Weight shifted forward. Then the lead moved and the gate changed position. I don't know which part mattered. Dr. Cho nodded once. Dana did not. And you want us to recreate that? No. I want to see whether it happens during normal handling when nobody is trying to prove anything. Dana looked at Dr. Cho. The veterinarian gave a small shrug. Observation only. Behind the barrier. Staff does exactly what staff normally does. Dana turned back to Jack. You don't touch him. You don't cue him. You don't ask my people to improvise. Jack said, understood. 10 minutes later, Bishop was walked through the adjacent exercise lane by a shelter employee while Jack stood behind chain link, hands loose at his sides. For most of the pass, nothing happened. Bishop sniffed, paused, shook once, then kept moving. Jack almost decided the first moment had been noise his own brain had arranged into a pattern. Then the handler changed position near the return gate. Bishop's mouth closed. His head lifted. His shoulders tightened in the same order. Jack said nothing. The handler continued the routine, and Bishop's breathing sharpened before he stepped sideways away from the opening. Jack looked at Dana. She had seen it this time. Dr. Cho had too. Dana's face did not soften. You noticed it twice, she said. That is not the same as knowing what it means. Jack looked through the fence as Bishop settled several feet from the gate without once looking at him. I know. Dana glanced toward the clock above intake. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. Same rule. You watch first. Then you tell us what you think you saw. Jack arrived at 6:58 the next morning and stopped outside the exercise yard before Dana had to remind him where his place was. The air was cool enough to tighten the skin across his knuckles, but the ground was dry and pale under the first light. Bishop was already in the fenced run with a shelter handler, moving at an easy walk, nose low, tail neutral. Jack stayed beyond the chain link and kept his hands in his jacket pockets. For several minutes, nothing happened. The handler crossed the yard, turned, paused, and changed direction. Bishop followed without drama. Jack felt the old urge to force a conclusion into clean lines. He resisted it by watching his own breathing instead. Slow in, slow out. No theory before the dog gave him one. When the handler approached the return gate, Bishop's pace shortened. His mouth closed. His ears shifted. The handler stopped before the latch and waited. Bishop looked toward the opening, then away. That's the same sequence, Jack said. Dana stood 10 feet behind him with a clipboard. Sequence of what? Preparation. For what? Jack watched Bishop move 2 steps sideways instead of forward. I don't know. That answer seemed to satisfy her more than certainty would have. The handler walked Bishop back toward the center of the yard and let the leash slacken. Bishop sniffed the dirt, circled once, then settled near the far side of the enclosure. Jack chose a folding chair beside the outer fence and sat down without facing him. He did not call Bishop's name. He did not tap his leg or offer food through the mesh. He simply occupied the space and let the dog decide what to do with him. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Bishop stood, stretched, and wandered toward the shade line. Halfway there, he paused. His nose lifted once toward Jack. Jack kept his eyes on the gravel near his boots. Bishop changed direction. Not toward him exactly, but closer. He crossed the yard and lay down several yards from the fence, near enough to hear Jack shift in the chair, far enough to leave without squeezing past anyone. Dana looked at the distance between them. He doesn't do that with everybody. Jack's fingers tightened once around the edge of the seat, then relaxed. Doesn't mean he likes me. Good. Dana checked a box on the clipboard. You're learning. The handler resumed the routine. This time Jack paid less attention to Bishop's eyes and more to the geometry of the yard, where the leash tightened, where the gate narrowed movement, where a person's body closed off open ground. As Bishop approached the transition point again, Jack noticed one detail repeat that he had dismissed the day before because it seemed too ordinary to matter. He leaned forward, then stopped himself before speaking. Dana saw the movement. You have something? Maybe. Maybe is cheaper than wrong. Jack nodded. Then let me change one thing next time. Nothing else. Dana studied him, then looked at Bishop, still lying near the fence by choice. One thing, she said. And if you're wrong, He pays for it, not you. The consequence landed harder than the permission, and Jack understood that the next test would have to prove more than whether his observation was clever. The next test began with Jack standing outside the exercise pen while a woman he had never met checked the gate, the shade cloth, and the handler's route before she said a word to him. Mara Velez, she said at last. Behavior consultant. Jack offered his hand, then stopped when he noticed she was already watching Bishop through the fence. Jack Mercer. I know. Her tone made it clear his resume had not impressed her. The early fall sun had burned the morning chill away, pushing the temperature close to 68 degrees, and dry wind snapped the fabric above the pen in short bursts. Dana stood near the outer gate with a clipboard. One variable, she reminded him. Jack nodded toward the return path. Yesterday, every time he tightened up, the person handling him was also closing off open ground. I want the route widened. Nothing else changes. Mara looked at him. That is an observation, not a diagnosis. Agreed. And if widening the path changes nothing, then I was wrong. Good. I can work with wrong. She entered the pen with the shelter handler and directed the setup herself. Bishop came out on a long line, alert but not frantic, his nose moving across the dry dirt. Jack stayed outside until Mara called him in, then told him exactly where to stand. You hold the line only when I tell you. You do not pull him through anything. Jack took the lead with both hands loose and low. Bishop glanced at him, then away. The dog was not waiting for commands. He was measuring distance. They moved slowly toward the transition area. This time the handler stayed farther to one side, leaving a clear lane behind Bishop. His mouth closed as they neared the narrower section. His ears shifted. Jack felt the line change weight in his hand. Every instinct he had from years of risk assessment told him to shorten control before uncertainty became movement. Instead, Mara said, "Stop." Jack stopped. Bishop planted his feet, looked toward the opening, then turned his head back toward the wider yard. Jack did not reel him in. After several seconds, Bishop stepped away from the transition zone on his own and lowered his nose to the dirt. His breathing slowed. Nothing spectacular happened. That was the result. Dana let out a breath through her nose. Better. Jack looked at Mara. So the open space matters. Maybe. Mara took the line from him. Or maybe today he was less tired. Maybe the wind changed what he heard. Maybe the handler's body position mattered. Maybe your presence did. One clean pass does not buy you certainty. Jack glanced at Bishop, who was now sniffing along the fence as if none of them deserved an explanation. He had wanted one altered condition to produce one clean answer. Instead, it had produced a larger question. Dana checked something on her clipboard. We keep the evaluation open a few more days. That decision carried its own cost. Kennel space, staff time, liability, another chance for Bishop to fail. Mara folded the long line into neat loops. Tomorrow we use the transition corridor. Jack looked toward the narrow passage beyond the yard. Same variable? No, Mara said. Tomorrow we find out what happens when he is allowed to refuse. By the next afternoon, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the shade cloth above the shelter's transition corridor, and Bishop stopped 3 feet short of the narrow passage before Jack ever touched the line. Mara stood off to one side with Dana behind her, both watching the dog instead of Jack. Don't solve it, Mara said. Just notice what he does. Jack kept his hands low. Bishop leaned forward, then checked himself. His mouth closed. One ear tipped toward the corridor, while the other tracked the open yard behind him. Jack felt the old impulse to make the hesitation disappear. In his current work, hesitation around a fuel shutoff or a damaged ladder meant somebody corrected the problem before the next shift. Here, the problem had 4 legs and an opinion. Come on, Jack said quietly, taking one step forward. Bishop did not. The line tightened by an inch. Bishop's shoulders rose. Jack stopped, but not before the dog backed hard enough to pull the line taut between them. No lunge. No snap. Just refusal with enough force to make the message unmistakable. Mara held out her hand. Give me the line. Jack passed it over. The movement stung more than it should have. Dana was watching the exchange, not Bishop. That's what worries me, she said. Not that you made him explode. That you decided his no meant not yet. Jack looked at the corridor. A staff member was waiting at the far end, trying to keep the route clear while another adult volunteer moved a cart through the adjoining hallway. Shelter life did not stop for one dog's evaluation. Every extra minute tied up space, people, and attention. Mara widened the distance and let Bishop stand without pressure. "We're done with the crossing," she said. "For today." Jack frowned. He didn't even get through it. "Correct. So we learned what? That you were more committed to the destination than he was." Jack let that sit. Bishop remained near the yard side of the corridor, breathing fast, but no longer pulling. The cart rolled away. The passage opened. Nobody asked him to move. Nearly a minute passed before Bishop lowered his nose, sniffed along the concrete seam, then turned in a slow arc. Jack had stepped back against the fence to clear the space. Bishop glanced at him once, then walked toward the open yard. Halfway there, he stopped, looked back, and returned several feet in Jack's direction before settling beside the wall. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to choose the same patch of shade. Dana noticed. "He came back after you stopped asking." Jack rubbed his thumb across the edge of his watchband. "Yeah." Mara crouched near Bishop without reaching for him. "That doesn't mean you cracked the case." Jack looked toward the corridor again. The wind snapped the cloth overhead. A metal latch clicked somewhere beyond the wall. Bishop's head came up. His body tightened. Jack watched the sequence and felt a theory assemble itself before he could stop it. "I think I know what sets him off," he said. Mara stood. "Then tomorrow we test that idea carefully," she said. "And if you're wrong, Bishop is the one who pays for your confidence." Mara did not let Jack touch the line the next morning until she had walked him through the plan twice. The air outside the shelter was cool and dry, about 55 degrees, and the high desert light made every shadow inside the fenced test area look harder than it was. Bishop stood with a shelter handler near the far gate, alert but not frantic, his nose working the dirt between brief looks toward the transition corridor. Jack pointed to the metal latch beyond the wall. "That sound keeps showing up before he changes." Mara folded her arms. "It shows up because this is a shelter. Doors make noise." "I know. Do you?" He did not answer. Dana watched from outside the enclosure, clipboard tucked against her chest. No one had forgotten that every extra test carried consequences for staff time, liability, and Bishop's future. Mara set the conditions herself. Low intensity. One change at a time. Stop the moment Bishop showed sustained escalation. Jack repeated the rules back to her, then took the long line when she allowed it. For the first minute, Bishop moved normally. The latch clicked once at a distance. His ears shifted. Jack felt a small change through the line and thought he had it. "There," he said. "Not yet," Mara replied. Bishop recovered almost immediately. That should have been enough to make Jack cautious. Instead, certainty crept in because the pattern looked familiar. When Mara suggested ending the pass, Jack said, "One more." Same sound, a little closer. She looked at him for a long second. A little. The second repetition happened with more movement in the corridor and less open space behind Bishop. The latch sounded. A staff member shifted position. The line tightened slightly as Jack shortened it without realizing he had done so. Bishop's mouth snapped closed. His weight came forward. His breathing went shallow. Jack saw the warning sequence, but interpreted it through the answer he had already chosen. "He's reacting to the sound," he said. Bishop lunged to the end of the line with a sharp bark and a burst of force that pulled Jack one step off balance. No one was bitten. No one fell. Mara ended the exercise immediately. "Back out." Jack obeyed this time. He widened the distance and let the handler take control. Bishop retreated to the far side of the enclosure, panting hard, then turned his body away from Jack. Dana's face had changed. Not anger. Calculation. "That was exactly what I can't justify," she said. "You decided your theory mattered more than his threshold." Jack looked at Bishop and said nothing. Years of training had taught him to separate useful observation from ego, but he had just failed to do it here. Mara removed the line from his hands. "You're done handling him until I review this." Jack nodded once. The loss of access landed cleanly because he had earned it. Later, while Bishop rested out of sight, Mara laid 2 observation sheets side by side on a table. "You were watching the noise," she said. "I was watching what happened before it." Jack leaned over the pages. "Meaning?" Mara tapped 2 entries he had barely noticed. "Meaning tomorrow we stop asking what scares him and start asking what leaves him no room to cope." Mara kept her finger on the 2 entries while Jack read them again. One note came from the first day. Bishop had stiffened when the handler shifted closer to the gate. The other came from yesterday. His breathing changed before the latch sounded. At the moment Jack shortened the line and the open space behind the dog disappeared. Jack straightened slowly. So the noise wasn't first. Not consistently, Mara said. Dana stood across the table with her arms folded. And the way he kept looking toward the corridor? Jack asked. Mara turned one of the observation sheets around. You called that fixation. Jack felt his jaw tighten. He had. More than once. Mara continued. Watch where his body was pointed. He wasn't tracking the person. He was checking the route behind him. The meaning of 2 days' worth of behavior shifted at once. The latch had looked like the cause because it was loud and obvious. Bishop's repeated glance toward the opening had looked like targeting because everyone was already waiting for aggression. But the sound was sometimes late, and the stare was not always aimed at the same person or object. What repeated was narrower, reduced space, tension through the leash, a human body closing one direction, and Bishop searching for another. So he's afraid of being trapped, Jack said. Mara shook her head before the sentence was finished. That is another label. We are not there yet. Jack looked down at the papers. Right. What we can say is that your single trigger theory does not hold. That landed harder because no one softened it. He had pushed Bishop past threshold, trying to prove the wrong thing. Outside, through the office window, Bishop was visible in the exercise yard with a shelter handler. The dog moved along the fence, stopped at a corner, then chose the wider half of the yard when the handler angled inward. Jack had seen that behavior before and assigned it the wrong meaning. Dana tapped the clipboard against her palm. This changes the question. Jack looked at her. From what sets him off to what conditions take away his options. And whether those conditions can be managed outside this building, Mara added. Because if he is only stable in a perfect setup, that is not enough for a normal placement. There it was. The new consequence. Understanding Bishop better could still lead to a harder answer. Jack stepped toward the window, then stopped several feet short instead of going closer. Bishop noticed movement inside, glanced over, and continued with the handler. No invitation. No reunion. Jack accepted it. What do you need next? He asked. Mara gathered the sheets. Descriptions from the previous homes. Not opinions. Sequence. Where people stood, what the leash was doing, whether he could move away. Dana exhaled. Most of those reports say the same thing. He snapped for no reason. Then we ask better questions, Mara said. Dana opened Bishop's file and selected the most recent return contact, a woman named Rachel Dunn. She put the call on speaker. Rachel answered on the fourth ring, and when Dana asked what happened before Bishop became dangerous, the woman said, Nothing. That's what I've been telling you. Nothing. That's what I've been telling you. Rachel Dunn's voice came through the speaker with the flat patience of someone tired of defending the same decision. Dana kept her tone neutral. I'm not asking you to defend it. Mara just needs the order of events. Rachel hesitated. He was fine in the house. Then one day he wasn't. Mara leaned toward the phone. Before the reaction, were you holding the leash? Yes. Was Bishop able to move away from you? Another pause. I don't remember. Jack stood by the window, saying nothing until Rachel added. I had him near the mudroom door. I was trying to get his harness on because we had an appointment. The words lined up too neatly with what they had seen at the shelter. Jack turned from the glass. Was he backing away before you reached for him? Silence. Mara looked sharply at him. Jack realized too late that the question had sounded less like curiosity than a conclusion. Rachel's voice hardened. Are you saying I caused it? No, Jack said. I'm asking, you weren't there. You're right. I spent 3 weeks changing my schedule around that dog. I stopped having people over. I moved furniture because the shelter told me he needed space. Then he scared me in my own house. And now some guy on speakerphone is explaining what I did wrong. Dana reached for the phone. Rachel, Jack is not part of our behavior staff. That distinction made the damage worse, not better. Then why is he questioning me? Rachel asked. No one had a clean answer. Jack's jaw tightened. He had done exactly what Mara had warned him about, seen a pattern, and pushed for confirmation before earning the right to ask for it. I apologize, he said. I should have stayed out of the interview. Rachel breathed out slowly. I want my written statement left as it is. I don't want another call. The line went dead. For several seconds, only the ventilation fan filled the office. Dana removed Rachel's number from the contact sheet and closed Bishop's file. That may have been our best recent first-hand account. Jack looked at the table instead of defending himself. Through the window, Bishop paced once along the fence, then lay with his back angled toward the building. The dog had no idea a human conversation had just narrowed his options. Mara gathered her notes. We still have what she said before the call ended, but we lost the chance to clarify it. And we do not contact her again, Dana said. Agreed, Jack replied. Dana's expression stayed firm. There's more. I got the staffing numbers this morning. We can't keep an open-ended evaluation running because one observer thinks we're close. She turned the desk calendar toward them and tapped a date 3 days away. 72 hours. After that, I need a placement recommendation or a different plan. Jack finally looked toward Bishop's yard. His access was still restricted, Rachel was gone as a source, and certainty had cost them time they did not have. Mara slid a blank behavior chart across the desk. Then tomorrow we stop chasing explanations, she said. We measure what Bishop can actually handle. Dana nodded once. And Jack stays behind the barrier until the data says otherwise. Mara started the next morning with a stopwatch, a behavior chart, and one rule Jack could not negotiate. He stayed outside the fence. The temperature was already climbing towards 70 degrees, and gusts moved dry dust across the exercise yard in thin sheets. A shelter handler walked Bishop on a long line while Mara changed only one condition at a time: distance from the corridor, angle of approach, available space behind him, tension on the line. Jack watched from the barrier and said nothing unless asked. The difference was measurable. When Bishop still had room to step away, his mouth sometimes closed and his ears shifted, but he recovered within seconds. When the route narrowed and the handler's body blocked the open side, his breathing shortened sooner. If pressure on the line increased at the same time, the change came faster. No single sound produced the reaction by itself. No single person did either. Dana recorded every repetition. That's useful, she said. Useful is not the same as safe. Mara nodded. Exactly. Jack felt the correction land without resistance this time. He had spent days trying to identify one thing Bishop feared. The chart in front of him showed something less convenient. Risk rose when several manageable pressures stacked together faster than Bishop could disengage. During the final pass, the handler stopped before the dog crossed threshold and gave him room. Bishop backed 2 steps, shook his coat, lowered his nose, and returned to a mat station near the center of the yard. Mara clicked the stopwatch. Recovery under a minute. Dana wrote it down. In a controlled setup. Yes. Nothing about her tone promised a placement. When the exercise ended, the handler unclipped Bishop inside the secured pen. Jack remained behind the fence, several yards away. Bishop walked to the water bowl, drank, then paced the perimeter once. Jack did not call him. Instead, he shifted away from the gate and sat sideways on a low bench, leaving the section of fence nearest the exit clear. Bishop stopped near the far corner. He looked toward Jack, then toward the open path behind him. For a few seconds he chose neither. Then he crossed the yard at an angle and stopped on the other side of the chain link, not directly in front of Jack, but close enough that they could occupy the same patch of shade without either one closing the distance. Jack slid his hand off his knee and rested it beside him. Bishop remained where he was. It was not obedience. It was cooperation with conditions attached, and for once Jack did not try to improve it. Mara watched from 10 feet away. That matters. Dana looked at the chart. So does this. She pointed to the cluster of notes showing Bishop's early signals, the conditions that increased risk, the effect of leash pressure, the importance of an exit path, and the time it took him to recover. We have enough data now to stop guessing. Jack looked over. Dana held up a separate form. Not enough to give him to you. Bishop stepped away from the fence as she spoke, choosing the wider side of the pen. Dana placed the form on the table between them. If you want the next step, it's a behavioral foster assessment, and you sign first that if our team says your home is wrong for him, you bring him back without a fight. Dana left the behavioral foster form on the table between them without sliding it any closer. Jack read the first page, then the second, then went back to the clause she had already warned him about. If the shelter's behavior team determined that his home, schedule, handling, or judgment created unacceptable risk for Bishop, the placement ended. No appeal by stubbornness. No promise that effort earned ownership. You want me to agree now that I might lose him later, Jack said. I want you to agree that wanting him is not the same as being right for him, Dana replied. Mara stood beside the observation chart from the morning, the pages crowded with the same variables they had finally stopped treating as isolated events. That's the part people keep getting wrong, she said. Bishop has been returned 16 times, and every return has been used as proof that something is wrong with him. But the harder truth is that some environments may be wrong for him even when nobody in them is cruel, careless, or dishonest. Jack looked through the office window. Bishop was in the secured pen with a handler, moving slowly along the fence, nose down, pausing whenever the wind carried a new scent across the dry yard. He was not waiting for Jack. That mattered more now than it would have a week earlier. So the 16 returns don't prove he can't live with people, Jack said. Mara shook her head. They also don't prove he can. The answer stripped away the story Jack had quietly been building for himself. The misunderstood dog, the observant veteran, the clean correction everyone else had missed. There was no clean correction. There was a German shepherd with a narrow margin under certain combinations of pressure, and there was a man who had already pushed that margin once because being nearly right had felt close enough to being right. Dana tapped the form. My job is not to reward you for caring. My job is to keep him from becoming someone else's 17th return. Jack's hand rested on the pen, but did not move. What happens if I sign? We evaluate your house first, Mara said. Entrances, layout, routine, where he can disengage. Then a supervised visit. If the setup works, maybe a behavioral foster. If it doesn't, we stop. And if he settles with me? Still not your decision alone. Jack gave a short breath that almost became a laugh. You people really know how to sell a dog. Dana's mouth twitched once. We stopped selling certainty around return number 12. Jack signed. The stroke of the pen changed more than his access to Bishop. It put his own judgment under review. An hour later, Mara followed him to his small house on the edge of Bend, where dry grass moved against the fence and open high desert lots stretched beyond the neighboring roofs. Jack had already arranged the entryway, moved furniture, cleared a path from the back door, and set a mat beside the living room wall. Mara walked through without praising any of it. Then she stopped near a narrow passage between the kitchen island and the rear door. This is your problem, she said. Jack looked at the space. It's 8 feet wide. Until a person stands here, a leash tightens there, and the door becomes the only exit. Jack stared at the setup he had built to make everything safer and finally saw how easily control could become pressure. Mara handed him the signed foster form. Tomorrow Bishop comes here for a supervised assessment. If you insist on making this house prove you were right, we leave with him. The next afternoon, Mara arrived at Jack's house with Bishop's shelter handler, the long line, and the same behavior chart they had used for 3 days. Jack had changed the kitchen before they came. The mat was farther from the rear door. A chair that narrowed the passage was gone. He had even removed the small table where he usually dropped his keys because it turned the route into a funnel when someone stood beside it. Bishop came through the front entrance without Jack holding the leash. He sniffed the baseboards, checked the living room, circled the kitchen island, and avoided Jack for the first several minutes. Jack let him. The test stayed quiet until they approached the rear door. Bishop's mouth closed. His pace shortened. The handler stopped. Jack saw the same sequence they had measured at the shelter. Narrowing space, reduced exit options, tension beginning through the line. He stepped sideways to open the path. Bishop backed away instead of following. Mara said nothing. Jack had a decision to make, and this time there was no room to disguise it as technique. Dana had called that morning with the shelter's condition. If Jack wanted the foster assessment to continue, he had to give up unilateral handling authority. Any future evaluation involving Bishop's known pressure pattern would be directed by Mara or the shelter team, and Jack would not be allowed to override a stop decision simply because the dog lived under his roof. Jack had signed a second page before they arrived. It removed the control he had assumed would come with taking responsibility. Now the cost became physical. When Bishop hesitated near the door, Mara said, "Jack, step out of the handling zone." For a second his hand hovered near the line. Then he walked away and sat on the far end of the porch, leaving the handler in charge. Bishop retreated into the yard. He paced once along the fence, drank from a water bowl, and stood facing the open high desert lot beyond the property line. The wind moved dry grass against the boards. Jack stayed where Mara had put him. He could no longer fix the moment, speed it up, or claim it. 10 minutes passed. Bishop wandered farther from the house, sniffing in wide arcs. Then, without a cue, he turned back. He did not run to Jack. He approached at an angle, stopped several feet away, shook his coat, and lay down facing the same direction Jack was facing. No command had brought him there. No leash pulled him into place. Mara watched for another minute before speaking. That is useful. It is not a verdict. Jack nodded. I know. Good. Because tomorrow's final evaluation will recreate the pressure pattern under controlled conditions. You will not be the handler unless the team assigns you. Jack looked at Bishop beside the porch, close by choice and still free to leave. Understood. Mara picked up the chart. And if the team tells you to stop, you stop even if it costs you the placement. Jack signed the final authorization without asking for another condition. And the next morning he walked into the shelter's evaluation yard knowing the only way forward was to let someone else decide whether Bishop could stay with him. Jack entered the evaluation yard and stopped where Mara told him to stop. Dana stood near the observation table with Dr. Cho, while a shelter handler held Bishop on the long line inside the marked transition area. The morning was dry and bright, about 67 degrees, with enough wind to move dust along the fence, but not enough to change the setup they had measured all week. No one was there to prove Bishop harmless. They were there to prove what actually made him unsafe. Mara began with the widest route. Bishop walked through easily, sniffed once, and kept moving. Then the handler repeated the approach with less open space behind him. Bishop's mouth closed. His pace shortened. On the next pass, the handler's body angle narrowed the exit while light tension came through the line. Bishop's ears shifted back. His head turned toward the open side that was no longer available. There, Mara said. That's the beginning. The metal latch clicked nearby. Bishop startled, but he did not escalate. Jack felt the last piece of his old theory fall away. The sound had never been the trigger by itself. Mara widened the path again, and Bishop recovered. Then she repeated the sequence once more, carefully, without increasing intensity beyond what they had already documented. Reduced space. Blocked retreat. Leash pressure. Bishop stiffened, his breathing shortened, and his weight moved forward. The handler stopped immediately and released pressure without dropping control. Bishop backed away, shook his coat, and chose distance. No lunge followed. No one forced him to continue. Mara looked at Dana. That's the pattern, Dr. Cho added, and nothing in his exam gives us a medical explanation that overrides it. Dana turned to Jack. So what triggered him? Jack did not reach for Bishop or answer like an expert. Not one noise. Not one person. He escalates when pressure stacks faster than he can get away, especially when the space narrows, the line tightens, and a person closes the route he's trying to use. Mara nodded. Exactly. The 16 returns suddenly made sense without making 16 people villains. Bishop had repeatedly been pushed through ordinary human situations, doorways, harnessing, exits, tight passages, where hesitation was treated as disobedience and backing away was prevented. The more trapped he felt, the louder his body had to become. The proof had been there from the first day. His mouth closing before the latch, his repeated checks toward open space, the faster escalation under line tension, the failed test when Jack shortened the lead, and the measurable recovery whenever pressure stopped. Dana picked up the placement form. Then here's the consequence. Bishop is not cleared for ordinary adoption. He is approved for a supervised behavioral foster with you, 90 days, mandatory check-ins, and immediate review if the management plan fails. Jack signed without smiling. The external conflict was finished, but the responsibility had just become real. The handler opened the secured exit from the yard. Bishop looked at the open path, then at Jack. Jack stepped aside instead of calling him. Bishop walked past the handler, paused, and chose to move toward Jack on a loose line. Dana handed Jack the foster packet, and together they walked toward the parking lot where Bishop's 90 days would begin. By the time Jack turned into his driveway, Bishop had stopped pacing in the back seat of the shelter vehicle and settled with his body angled toward the window, watching the dry grass and sagebrush slide past. The first week of the foster placement was quieter than Jack expected and more demanding than he had imagined. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the work. He kept the rear doorway clear, left the narrow kitchen passage open, and followed Mara's management plan without improvising. Bishop had his own mat, his own water station, and space to walk away without being followed. Twice, Jack canceled afternoon plans because the wind and activity around the neighborhood had pushed Bishop closer to threshold than usual. He made the calls, changed his schedule, and moved on without treating the inconvenience as a test of character. His marine safety contracts continued, but he stopped accepting back-to-back jobs that would leave Bishop alone longer than the foster plan allowed. It cost him one small assignment east of town. He did not complain to Dana about it. At the 30-day review, Mara observed Bishop at the house and confirmed the placement could continue. At 60 days, Dr. Cho found no new medical concern, while the behavior notes showed fewer escalations and faster recovery when limits were respected. The shelter did not erase the old record. 16 returns stayed 16 returns. What changed was the language around them. Bishop was no longer listed for ordinary adoption, and Jack was not given ownership as a reward for effort. The 90-day foster remained supervised, with a formal reassessment still required before any permanent placement could be considered. By then, Bishop had developed routines that were unmistakably his. He preferred the cooler section of the living room floor in the afternoon. He disliked having anyone stand over him while he rested. He checked the backyard fence after dinner, then usually came inside without being called. Some mornings he wanted distance from Jack entirely. Jack had learned not to take that personally. On the 73rd day, he came home from a safety inspection, hung his keys by the door, and heard a sharp metal click from the rear latch as the wind caught it. Months earlier, that sound had pulled his attention toward a frightened dog in a shelter kennel. Bishop's head came up from the hallway. His mouth closed. Jack saw the sequence immediately. He did not move toward him. He opened the back door wide and stepped aside. Bishop stood still for several seconds, watching the open yard. Then he walked outside, circled through the dry grass, sniffed along the fence, and let the tension drain from his body on his own time. Jack stayed in the doorway. A minute later, Bishop turned. Nothing pulled him back. No line tightened. No command crossed the distance. He returned across the porch, paused beside Jack, and stepped inside. The early fall sun lay bright across the high desert lots beyond the fence, and behind them the door remained open until Bishop was ready for it to close.